And two, two, threes. Yeah.
So wait a second. You guys, I saw that you were at a CO2 conference or a TPG conference. You were at some banking conference. Saks.
We're both at the Kochi Summit.
CO2. CO2 is a large investor. Is it a hedge fund, private equity?
They're a late stage fund. It's a big late stage fund.
Summit's a really big word. Was it a summit or was it?
Okay. Blinken just went to China, and this was the first trip for an American Secretary of State since 2018. Obviously, things have been strained with the spy balloon and the visits to Taiwan. Blinken gave some basic goals for this engagement with China, the fentanyl problem, some detained Americans, and protecting U.S. citizens working in China. Those were kind of the easy check boxes, but they wanted to create also an open line of communication between our militaries, which China wasn't super stoked on, but wouldn't agree to.
Tony did a great job.
Yeah.
Okay. I think what's really disappointing is that while Tony's over there doing his hard work, which must be tough to do because it must have been a little bit like dancing on eggshells, right? He had to be intense, very thoughtful, very measured. But as far as I could tell, he did a fabulous job. Full disclosure, he's a friend of mine, so maybe it's biased. But then over here, Biden at some mid-level fundraiser in California is calling Xi a dictator. How hard must it be for you to try to do your job when your boss is just like completely undisciplined? Like, here's the problem with that is that if the United States actually thought that Xi was a dictator, do you think that a mid-level fundraiser that we were all invited to in Northern California that none of us said yes to is the place to announce a foreign policy shift like that? Absolutely not. So it just means that, again, there's just more evidence about Biden being very undisciplined. Now, again, that could be an age issue. It could be a mental acuity issue. We don't know because we're not given a chance to really prosecute that problem. Meanwhile, Tony's there trying to do the best job he can, and the sand shifts underneath him. Thank God he was able to get the trip done before this thing happened. That's what I think. But that gap is a very big gap, and a very big problem, I think, because whatever he built up, it practically flushed down the toilet if you saw the reaction from the Chinese, which was to be deeply offended. And
It makes
no
no
different
sense
than
to poke.
when he went to see NBS and they had to negotiate a fist bump versus a handshake. Like, what is all of this either unplanned or undisciplined theater? Why are we engaging in any of this stuff? It doesn't make any sense.
Shema, Joe Biden's always been known for being a liability in terms of these statements. When he worked for Obama, he was the VP. He also said things, he shot from the hip a lot. You should not be calling him a dictator when they're trying to do this critical work. It's a stupid move. I think everybody can agree. You were to say something, Brad?
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of market reaction going in. So the K-Web, the Chinese index, was up about 20% heading into these series of meetings. Now, notably, Blinken was not scheduled to have a meeting with Xi. And so what happened is on day one, there was a meeting with the foreign minister, right? And it seems that there was some positive trend lines coming out of these first two meetings with the top diplomat, with the foreign minister, which led to the meeting. And notably in the meeting, he did say the United States has not changed its policy on Taiwan. We don't support Taiwanese independence. Now, the market reaction post-visit was down 10%. And I think this is owing to what Chamath said, that people felt like maybe we took a step forward here, that we at least had a meeting, but then it was another step back. And so I think where we sit at the moment is there probably going to be some follow-on meetings coming out of this. This was not, a path back to where we were, but I think it was a stabilizing moment. And, again, we were just at the East Meets West conference where there were a lot of Chinese CEOs and founders who were there. And I think the idea there was like things are stable, like not getting worse. And by the way, 6 months ago, there was a real concern that things were deteriorating quickly. So I think it's, you can see something constructive coming out of this.
Not getting worse was how I felt. coming out of it, and then Biden then makes it worse. I agree, it's just a stupid gap.
Let me tell you about some of the reporting from the Chinese side. So after these diplomatic events, and you're right, Blinken met with Wang Yi for 7 hours, then he got an audience with Xi Jinping. They do these readouts where each side basically produces a public summary of the meeting. In the Chinese readout, they said that U.S.-Chinese relationships are at the lowest point they've ever been. I mean, since, I guess, diplomatic relations were kind of reestablished under Nixon. So that from the Chinese standpoint, they believe that relationships are at the worst they've ever been. Moreover, the U.S. sought to put Ukraine on the agenda. The Chinese response to that was, we are not interested in discussing our relationship with Russia. That is none of your business. So this idea, there's been this neocon fantasy that somehow China would help us in this war between Russia and Ukraine. And I've said all along that the last thing China wants is for neocons to achieve their objectives with respect to Russia, because then China alone will be in the gun sights of U.S. hawks. So China will do what it has to do to support and even prop up Russia if they have to. Remember, China and Russia, and specifically Xi and Putin, they're the two leaders who've met with each other more often than any other leader. And they've called each other their best friends, or most, I think the language they used was most
Besties?
bosom friends was what they called it.
Bosom friends.
Bosom buddies, yeah. But, yeah.
So Biden, great TV show. Good program.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to give people exactly what happened, Biden, when he was at this campaign fundraiser in NorCal, that again, yeah, we probably invited you on the show. He was talking about the military Chinese spy balloon. He said she got very upset, quote, that this was a great embarrassment for dictators when they don't know what happened. And he continued to say that she didn't know the balloon had come to the U.S. and was off the course in Alaska. And this is the kind of thing where he's basically saying she is stupid, or whatever, or there's some level of incompetence over there. It's exactly the wrong message you want to send. Calling him a dictator, calling him stupid, and saying he was embarrassed. Like, why would you provoke that to raise money or to be a tough guy? It makes no sense. I mean, it sounds like Trump's version of foreign
From the Chinese standpoint, they thought the whole balloon thing was a travesty. I mean, I don't know what the truth of it is, but they feel like it was just this continuous drumming up of outrage on the American side against China, and they wanted to put that behind us in terms of the relationship. I heard Blinken interviewed about this. Jamath, I agree with you. I have no complaint with Blinken in terms of how he handled this meeting. I have a complaint about how he handled Moscow, but not Beijing. But they wanted to put this balloon business behind them. My guess, I've always said that it never made sense to me that the Chinese would use such a ham-fisted way of conducting espionage to deliberately fly a balloon over the U.S. It never made sense to me. And then it became this cause celeb in the U.S. And I think the Chinese, at a minimum, wanted to put it behind us. And then Biden reopened the issue.
Like this submarine tragedy, the balloon is like made for network television because it's a live event. You put live cameras up and you can cover it 24/7. It's just like Trump.
We better
or
be
the
really
submarine.
careful.
It's just for the media. It's for the media. It's catnip for the media.
We have to be very careful now, I think, in our relationship with China, because, again, you now have this Asiatic alliance between China, Russia, and Iran. It is the most capable, let's say, adversary the United States has ever faced. Remember that when we faced the Soviet Union, their economy was never bigger than 1/3 the U.S. economy, the Soviet bloc versus the Western bloc. The Chinese economy, on a purchasing power parity basis, is roughly the same size as the U.S., and they've got more manufacturing capacity. So if you think about the type of manufacturing capacity the United States had during World War II, that now belongs to China, not the U.S. We have hollowed out
I just don't
our
understand
manufacturing.
why our foreign policy, Brad, I'll bring this discussion, why our foreign policy isn't being driven by some of the things that we could do together to collaborate. Like we have global warming, we have, issues on this planet that we could collaborate on. It seems like we're spending no time on those issues and savor out. Cuba, another example. Why can't we set a goal for the United States to normalize relations with Cuba and get them on our side, since they are the equivalent of, let's say, Ukraine did to American comparison? Why don't we make peace with Cuba? Why can't we have a peace-based foreign policy where we're trying to build bridges? God, Cuba and the United States can do amazing things together, and we should be trying to win that relationship instead of living 50 years in the past over it. I'm not sure.
There was legitimate outrage over the past week because we discovered that China was planning on. They already have an intelligence outpost in Cuba, listening outpost, but also they were thinking about doing training of troops in Cuba. And that would be a violation of the Monroe Doctrine, and we should basically get our backs up over that. The Monroe Doctrine states that no disintegrated power can bring troops, weapons, or bases into the Western Hemisphere. The United States spent over 100 years basically enforcing the Monroe Doctrine. It would greatly diminish U.S. security if we allowed any foreign great power to have troops in the Western Hemisphere. So we deserve to have our horns out over that. The problem is that we have our horns out over everything, and so we're not really taken seriously quite so many times. I don't think we're really taken seriously by the Chinese on this, and this should be a teaching moment to the foreign policy establishment because this is Russia's objection. Russia's objection is to having American troops, weapons, and bases directly on their border. This is our objection to what China is seeking to do in Cuba.
Okay, Brad, do you want to add something to that, or can we move to
Well,
COVID?
just real quickly, I would say,
Yeah.
there's a real appetite in the business community to be engaged. This idea that we're going to decouple the world, never have to deal with these folks, right, is just a farce. ByteDance bought $1 billion worth of NVIDIA chips announced this week, right? Like the world is entangled, and I think we would be better off having our political and business leaders in more sync over how to achieve this long-term safety and prosperity, as opposed to what feels like a disjointed foreign policy relative to the global reality around AI and what's happening on the business front.
I agree. Well said. Yeah. And I mean, it's just so obvious. Why can't we be collaborating on something? And we see, you and I made our trip to the UAE, and then we see the Saudis, bringing movies back. We have certain regions. We're doing a pretty good job of engaging. Engagement, reasonable engagement is a good idea.
It's because I think RFK has said this. We have created a very dangerous revolving door between our most critical institutions and the largest industrial companies in the United States. And that revolving door creates all kinds of conflicts of interest. And those things get sorted out via revenue, dollars, and profits.
Incentives.
And so those incentives will drive us, if it's the military industrial complex, to go to war. And you're seeing that. It'll complicate our foreign policy. So this is why I've always said the thing that we're doing is something that the military industrial complex cannot stop, which is our energy independence. And when you have energy independence and abundant costless energy, I do think that the biggest thing you get is this peace dividend. You stop fighting these wars, you become much more rational abroad, and you're like, okay, I don't need to fight with all of these people because things are so great within our borders.
You're so right, Schwab, because we actually have stopped those wars, and now we're creating two other ones, Russia or Ukraine. We can't help ourselves. What's that?
We can't help ourselves, and we use the scarcity of commodities as a boogeyman to basically incentivize us to go in these foreign misadventures. And it really has to stop.
By the way, just two quick points on that. On Taiwan, there's an election next year, and it looks like right now that the pro-China party might actually take right now the party that's in power is more of a pro-Western party. And the reason I think is that the Taiwanese are looking at what's going on in Ukraine, and they're looking at the corpses of the Ukrainian youth pile up, and they're thinking maybe it's not such a great idea to be an American proxy state. Or in the words of Henry Kissinger, he once quipped that it's dangerous to be an American enemy, but it's absolutely fatal to be an American friend. I think that this war may be backfiring in terms of the incentives it's creating around Taiwan. Remember, Biden said that this war would basically help protect Taiwan by deterring China. It might actually deter Taiwan from opposing China. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
All an able-bodied person in Taiwan, the voting age, needs to do is read the newspaper and understand that in the last 2.5 years, we've essentially started a multi-trillion-dollar program to de-lever ourselves from all the critical resources that China and Taiwan gives us. And so if you're a Taiwanese citizen, the writing is unfortunately on the wall, which is that we are giving ourselves the optionality to not do it. So to your point, David, if you're a rational thinking Taiwanese person, unfortunately, you're forced to be in a position where you may have to hedge your bets. And the United States can basically have chip supply that comes from Europe and Mexico, now all of a sudden the criticality of TSMC goes away. To wit, I published this tweet yesterday about Buffett and his trades in Japan. Right, he bought these 5 trading companies. It's just a really novel carry trade that I've really fallen in love with, just understanding it. But the coda to that is that when he did this, going long Japan, what he actually also did was he levered himself from China. He had a long position in TSMC and he said, I'm out. And when they asked him why he sold TSMC, he said, this is a very complicated thing. And he basically said that it's not a bet that's worth making. And I think underneath that, if I had to guess what he's trying to say about Taiwan, say TSMC is the only part that we are not going to get into a land war, which means that that asset and its equity value is in danger, and I don't want it. And I think that that's a very clinical summation of his rational action. So to your point,
Well, here's what Blinken
people
said.
speak with their dollars.
I think it's very important. You know, the one China policy says Taiwan is part of China. It's not an independent country, but we've had a very ambiguous tolerance for this ambiguity of Taiwan acting as its own nation while saying we support the one China policy. And that ambiguity has served us very well in the China relationship. Here's what Blinken said at the press conference, quote, we do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. The status quo is referring to here, Brad, is that they get to be independent in Taiwan, but we don't say they're independent. They are obviously acting in an independent manner, but it is not our business to tell the Taiwanese people that they're independent or not. It's their decision to determine if they're independent or not. Any thoughts on the trade by Buffett and Lincoln?
Well, I think that
comment at the press conference on this ambiguity.
I think we want to maintain the ambiguity. I think we're basically saying to China, don't change the status quo, at least for now, right? While we rebuild these chip fabs in Arizona and other parts of the world, I think most of the wealthy families I've talked to from Taiwan believe that 5 or 6 years from now, the U.S. will no longer be in the position where they will need Taiwan and Taipei as much as they do today. And they're
How many
worried
years do you
about.
think it will take to be independent? Say it one more time and explain.
Well, it's not about being independent.
I'm doing terrible.
It's how much longer will Taiwan have what they believe to be de facto protection from the United States? And I was told by one very influential Taiwanese family that they believe when the 5th chip fab comes online in Arizona, which I think is scheduled for 25 or 26, they intended to have most of their family members out of Taiwan at that period of time. Now, I think most Taiwanese don't envision this being, a violent invasion of Taiwan. It's more of a take under in the same way that Hong Kong was. And so I don't see an American president, frankly, going to war, nor would I want them to go to war over Taiwan. But I think it's in all of our interest to maintain that status quo, which is why taunting the Chinese over the course of the past few years over Taiwan has seemed like a policy that's not fit with our goals.
Right. Well, if you look at skin in the game, the fact that the CHIPS Act went through so quickly, the fact that Warren Buffett, as you pointed out, Schmuth, made his bet, and this family that has obviously, skin in the game, quite literally, are making these decisions, I think we know where this is headed. You can just follow the bets. And if you look at the bets in 5 years, follow the dollars. And also where people put themselves geographically. Everybody left Hong Kong when the turnover happened, or before it. They went to Singapore, they went to UAE. They voted with their feet and their dollars. And that's obviously what's going to happen here. It's a good pivot because this criticism of the Ukraine policy.
Fuck around and find out.
Sachs pointed out came because there is a belief on his part and others that the pod here, all in, is putting its unilateral support behind RFK. That is not true. There are 2 people on the pod who posted a fundraiser last week. And here is what Matt incorrectly said, because I have not put the support behind RFK. I think it's very interesting. Race, who has Freeberg, and Sachs, the folks handed over to them. Here's what Matt said in his Substack. And even though it's it's not the subject of this post, I did want to say that I think it's really sleazy and gross for the host of the All In podcast to be engaging in this Kennedy boosterism as a bang shot way of harming Joe Biden's re-election prospects, notwithstanding recent convergence around Russia policy. Kennedy represents precisely the strand of progressive thought that right of center business people have rightly spent the better part of a century bemoaning. His is an anti-progress, anti-technology, ultimately anti-human worldview that stands against biomedical progress, against
Yeah.
energy progress, and against
The
human
guy who wants
flourishing.
to blow up as many Ukrainians as possible
As a
in order
meat
to then
shield.
plead.
Yeah.
Exactly.
gross.
Thinks it's anti-human. Listen, I don't even think we should be giving him this much time.
Well, no, but I think it is important that because people now have connected this pod with the rise of RFK. This was the first major podcast he did.
What Iglesias is accusing us somehow of supporting RFK not because of issues, but somehow because it's a bank shot for Donald Trump, which is ridiculous. None of us support Donald Trump. He's not even my preferred candidate in the Republican lane.
Well, what he said was a bank shot against Biden. Just
It's that simple. What's wrong with that? He's not even making any arguments here. Look, we've explained in a lot of detail, and I explained in my response all the issues where I support RFK. He supports free speech over censorship. He supports civil liberties over the surveillance state. He supports peace instead of war. He supports sealing the southern border, virtually on Democrats and talking sense on that issue. And I believe that he's completely correctly diagnosed what we're doing in Ukraine. So on the issues, I
you
support
disagree with him on
RFK.
some issues, right? You disagree with him on nuclear, and you may disagree with him in his anti-vax stance, if he is in fact anti-vax.
Can I just,
Let's finish those
I
two.
think he was right about COVID lockdowns. And I think he was right about
Right.
COVID, the so-called COVID shot that wasn't even a vaccine, that should not have been required.
But what about those two issues? You obviously disagree with him on some things. Do you disagree with him on his anti-vax stuff and his nuclear stuff?
I don't know enough about those issues to have like a firm stance. What I would say is that every candidate represents a bundle of issues, and you support the ones who are aligned with you on the issues that are most important to you.
Got it.
On the issues that are most important to me, which are these questions, great questions of war and peace, and the questions of free speech and censorship. And even I would say the question of the economy and who do we prioritize, because he wants to prioritize the middle class. On those big questions, I feel like I'm aligned with RFK.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
that's why I support him.
Let me go to
And
Chamath.
by the way, do you think Jack Dorsey is supporting RFK as a bank shot something or other? No, he's supporting it because he agrees with RFK on these questions of war and peace and free speech.
I'm just letting everybody be very clear about their position, since this is becoming the support of RFK by this podcast, or 2 of the 4 people in the podcast, is now becoming kind of national news.
Iglesias isn't even making any arguments here. He's just applying derogatory labels to us.
Yeah,
And
that's
really
ad hominem.
what this is a disciplinary tactic or a shaming tactic
Yes,
by these sort of enforcers for the establishment
right.
want to prevent independent thinkers from stepping out of line.
I agree.
That's what this is about.
It looks like this outsider went to the Dolphin School in Harvard University, so there you have it.
Yeah, you got a $2 million education, doesn't know what a basis point is.
He's the guy with the basis point, right?
Oh, boy.
Phil's man. He graduated Dolphin Harvard. Oh, good luck with your Substack, dude.
Oh my god.
Chamath, you are pro-nuclear. You've been very clear about that. Although you're pro-renewables mostly, you've been clear about that in this podcast and many conversations I've had with you. You are also pro-vaccine, but you're anti what happened with the lockdown. So maybe you could expand upon your support of RFK, why you held a fundraiser for him, and what things you agree with him on, and maybe what things you don't necessarily agree with.
Well, first, I actually did what I think a lot of people haven't done, which is just listen to him, just stop talking, sit in the open yapper, and there is an enormous amount of long-form content where you can really understand where he stands on some of these topics. He's right about the war on Ukraine. We shouldn't be in. He's right about free speech, which is we should have it. He's right that the COVID vaccine was not a vaccine. And really what it's done is actually discredit the word vaccine, unfortunately, in a lot of people's minds. he actually is a person that is pro-vaccine for all these other vaccines. He himself is vaccinated, his children are vaccinated. You would all know this stuff if you just took 2 minutes to just listen to him. He is against the COVID vaccine. And what I would say is, I'm very sympathetic to that. I'm very sympathetic to the job the FDA had to do. I think they generally did do a great job. And something and we allowed it to be labeled that misappropriates what it is. It's not a vaccine. And the problem with that is that now it makes people mistrust the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. That's crazy. You shouldn't mistrust the MMR vaccine or DTaP. But because those things are lumped in with the same thing as a COVID vaccine that is at best 30 or 40% efficacious, we have these problems. He calls that out pretty honestly. So I like the fact that he actually speaks in nuance. I like the fact that when I listen to him, I find that the talking head think police are generally lying. It confirms what I believe about them. Because he just says things in a very plain-spoken, intelligent way. And I think that there are a lot of folks who don't want to think or want to be given the simple answer, who want to just reject what he stands for and just take the establishment view in the hopes that they'll get, I don't know, maybe accepted by the establishment. The establishment just wants to curate power. And I just think that people should be thinking for themselves. If you listen to the Rogan podcast, if you listen to the Jordan Peterson podcast, there are millions and millions and millions of links, page views, discussions, and thoughts, and there's probably thousands of minutes of RFK explaining what he thinks on basically any topic you can imagine. You can get to your own conclusion. And what I think we'll find, and this is true for me, is there's 10% of stuff who are just vehemently supportive of, 70% of stuff that's like quite reasonable and fair, and then there's the rest, which is a spectrum of things I disagree with. But then you're left with blended expected value where you're like, man, this guy is really better than all the other alternatives.
Brad, I'll let you go on and give my position.
What I find most insidious about the opposition to this discussion is people are upset that you're not swearing an allegiance to a dogmatism, right? The truth of the matter is this group has hosted dinners for Ro Khanna, for Senator Manchin. We've hosted dinners for DeSantis, right? Had I been here, I would have put my name on the dinner for Kennedy because I want to gather information. I'm an analyst. I want to think for myself. How can we spend trillions and put ourselves into potentially harm's way without having a real conversation in Congress and on these pods about the risk of war? Why can't we have an authentic post-mortem about the efficacy of the COVID vaccine without being shamed? The revolution going on in this country, which is fantastic from my perspective, is that there is no longer a monopolistic control over the discussion. And that's why this podcast and this friendship and the conversation we all had here is resonating with people because they also want to hear all the different sides, because most people are capable, are way smarter than the elites on the coast think. You know, I'm from Indiana. Lots of smart folks who think for themselves in Indiana, but they're told by coastal elites what to think. And they reject this, and that's what you're seeing in this discussion and so many of these others. It's not about vaccines, it's not about a war. It's about their control over how you think and them wanting to force you to swear to an orthodox.
I think that's really well said.
Yeah, that is well said. But the way they try to control what you think is by labeling candidates so as to exclude them or make them sound crazy. So, Jake Al, I mean, you kind of introduced RFK as an anti-vaxxer. I don't think that is the correct way to describe his position or the singular way that he should be labeled.
No, I don't do that. I said here are the things he believes that we agree with, and then I gave the things that the media is saying. You know, so I was trying to present the totality and said he is obviously in favor of the class and stuff. So
Well,
I
he was right
want
about
to
that,
be
but-
clear on my position here. So I am in support of vibrant long-form debate like we have here. And I'm support of anybody who takes on the establishment, because there are crazy incentives, as we talk about here. Incentives matter, and we are long overdue for a discussion on vaccines. But it's very important that everybody understand here that everybody on this podcast took the COVID vaccine, and everybody here, our kids have been
It's not a
vaccinated.
vaccine. It's not a vaccine.
Exactly. So they took the
We were
COVID
injected with an
reduction.
experimental mRNA treatment.
Experimental.
Played by the media into thinking it would prevent us
And-
from ever getting COVID, which it did not do.
I think
2
it's
months
fair to
later,
say
I got
vaccines are good, and the COVID thing was not very.
And it reduced that in older people, probably group of people, and we'll know when we do a postmortem. But do
now
not
we
take
got this mRNA like flowing through our bodies.
Mm.
It might be a time bomb.
mRNA flowing
And
through
for
our
people
bodies.
who are wondering, like, if we should even be having these discussions, the hypocrisy of the media, I think, is very important to look at, because the media has been attacking this topic over and over again. Not that it matters, but when we moved into the top 100, top 50, top 10, that's when the knives came out. And I would like to remind the media of the long history of investigative journalism and debates. What was once a conspiracy theory often goes on to win a Pulitzer Prize. And, you know, the hypocrisy here is crazy, because if you look at some of the greatest stories and investigative journalist pieces, they started with these debates, rumors, etc. Abu Ghraib,
Dude, our fucking team sucks, dude.
Ralph Nader,
That was
I'd say
Cy
very
Hirsch's
interesting.
reporting. That was Cy
Yes.
Hirsch's reporting, and he can't
And now
get the
they're
time of
discrediting
day.
it. Right.
He can't get the time of day for his report on who really destroyed Nord Stream.
The Catholic Church sex scandal, the Boston Globe.
The mainstream media does not perform the function that you're describing anymore. They act as the bodyguard for the elite, for the establishment.
They actually have, even of late,
They are stenographers for the people in power.
not exactly true. They have actually done incredible reporting, but there is a group of them that is from and there's the taxing commission. That one is from 2020. And then scams. I know you don't follow Pulitzers or investigative journalism. In 2020, Brian Rosenthal at the New York Times did a massive expose on the predators New York City taxi industry. And then at the same time, this
that might be important to
anti-Uber and
New Yorkers. There's a few other issues that might be more important to the nation.
it was an example of protectionism and rent seeking. The Enron scandal, big tobacco, 60 Minutes.
What about the pretzel monopoly for the South Park of Bronx?
What about that hot dog vendor on
No, you guys are uninformed.
He didn't have all of his licenses up to date.
I thought there was a law
What about the big expose on that?
botulism.
You guys are true. The fact is, at the same time that the New York Times, CNN were attacking what Uber was doing, the New York Times won a fucking Pulitzer for their coverage of predatory loans by rich, powerful people
Great.
in New York City.
I bet they also did a great story on the guy selling trinkets outside Penn Station without a
For
license.
somebody
Right?
who's a man of the people like yourselves, actually should actually be more informed. Okay,
Well, what they
let's-
should be reporting on, for example, what the
Yeah.
if the Pulitzers work the way they should, is where patient zero came from on COVID. Because
and they
Michael
will,
Schellenberg just reported this over the last week, and it got picked up by the Wall Street Journal. That patient zero, it turns out, was a researcher at the Wuhan lab who was performing gain of function research.
Yeah, shocker.
Another conspiracy theory proven true.
And we'll wind up being a Pulitzer.
He deserves a Pulitzer.
He does. And the crazy thing about this quote unquote conspiracy theory that turned out to be true is like it brought together the most odd bedfellows, Rand Paul and Jon Stewart. When Rand Paul and Jon Stewart could be in a room and agree on basically the totality of the topic, we should all just pay attention because it's not a normal world in which these two guys would otherwise get along.
Right.
And both of them nailed it from day one.
Say, hey, now connect the dots further, okay? Why was the truth suppressed? Why did it not come out? Because Fauci had funded gain of function research at the Wuhan lab via EcoHealth Alliance. So he knew that if at the beginning of this pandemic it turned out that he had been partially responsible for the creation of this virus and it now turned into a pandemic around the world, his career would have been over.
And it's worse, Saks. It's even worse than that. 46% of the advertising on TV news comes from farm. And we did not always allow farm spending. And this may not be one-to-one. It may not be that a specific person report at CNN or Fox or any of the networks is saying, oh, I'm going to lose my job if I write something critical of farm. But they're not doing the investigative pieces on, I can tell you this, on the people who have 46% of their advertising revenue, unless it really gets to the final inning on something. And that is something that we need to question.
Right.
The media is funded 46% by pharma companies. And pharma companies were given a pass. And if you criticize any of the pharma companies, the media is going to come for you. And so, listen, I'm not tinfoil, but you do have to look at
It's not tinfoil. Listen, the media is funded by big pharma, and its primary sources are these high-level government employees who've been there forever who leak them information. That is why the New York Times was carrying water for Fauci and big pharma. This is the marriage of state power and corporate greed that RFK Jr. denounces.
well, they have folks. So he believes he could be assassinated by the CNN.
No, he didn't say it like that.
He didn't say it like that. He was asked what is his strategy on campaigning and all of that stuff. And he said, look, I'm going to do as much as possible. The one thing that I'm going to avoid are like these open air raids, because there's just a lot of folks that we can't control, crowd control. Yeah. Okay. Reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation on Rogan went something like this. Rogan was asking questions about the Kennedy assassinations, and RFK believes, something like 60% of the American public believes that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone. Then Rogan asked him, would you ever feel afraid running for office? And his answer was basically, no, not really. It's not something that I'm preoccupied with. But yeah, I'll take precautions. Does that mean he thinks the CIA is going to assassinate him? No, that's not what he said. But that is how the media reported it, including Fox News. That became the soundbite.
Well, the soundbite from this podcast was that he believes his uncle was and his father. That the CIA was involved
A
in
lot of people believe
assassinations.
that, Jason. A lot of people.
I am not giving my opinion. I'm giving his opinion on it. He said it on this podcast. And they release all the information to this day, even though they've been commanded to do so. So you make your own decision, folks. According to Bloomberg, there is a ton of action for startup shares in secondary markets. If you don't know what a secondary market is, that's when one investor buys shares in a company that's not yet public directly from another investor's on the cap table. So if Stripe, which is not yet public, or Reddit, there are shares floating around in those companies, either previous employees or previous investors. One firm might see an opportunity there and buy them. As this process of bottoming out has occurred, PitchBook reported Tiger Global told secondary investors, and that's a class of people who like to buy these, that they could bid on any individual private company in its portfolio. They tried to sell a bundle of these shares, about 30 startups at a time, but they couldn't find buyers according to the reports. So now they're allowing people to bid on a per company basis. Some of these are being marked down a third, 50%, etc. Here's the quote from Bloomberg. As of May 31st, shares of startups were trading at a median discount of 61% compared to valuations at their latest funding rounds, according to a report by Ford Global Holdings. A16, according to the report, is actively buying shares in secondary. Excel, Bain, Bessemer, and Kleiner are also using secondary to grow stakes in their existing investments, doubling down, as it were. Crossover firms like Cotu, Tiger Global, and even Brad's Altimeter are actively searching for deals. So, Brad, your thoughts on this? Is this sign of a bottom? And why are you doing this?
It's
Or is it true you're doing it?
Yeah, it is. It is true. I mean, our job is to look at all